I am going to read the end of a short piece, but that was nevertheless too long, about the return of Ulysses. I called it the return of Ulysses, but had I known the Bulgarian word that we just heard for the exile who cannot return, I would have used that word. Ulysses had tried to redo his life in many places. In one, he had been kept imprisoned in a cave-like room, like sheep to be fattened and devoured. In another, he had worked and slept in an underground factory among clattering machinery, surrounded by men and women who had forgotten even their names. In a third, he had been allowed to stay only if he swore to leave again after a certain time and not claim any of the benefits of an ordinary laborer. In a fourth, he had been forced to hide night and day from the immigration police, and if anyone asked, he said his name was nobody. Twice he had become a prostitute. In the most dreadful place of all, ghost-like souls past all hope whirled about him in howling droves and told him of the terrible things that had happened to them. Officials with bored faces went around taking down their stories and collecting them in cardboard boxes. After Cuma, he'd seen the Sibyl in several of those places, staring blankly among those who had lost their memory, huddled among the sans-papiers, wandering among the ghostly asylum seekers. She had appeared in the midst of them all, or had sat to one side brooding, or had shuffled with the crowd, waiting endlessly in queues to fill in forms, furnish documentation, explain, cajole, plead. He'd seen her once with two other old women dragged handcuffed onto a plane between armed gendarmes and had said nothing. But the women were sobbing and screaming, and the other passengers had been very upset. Another time, she had stood among the neighbors watching a small African boy being taken from his school to a waiting car, his teacher shouting curses at the abductors. Then, too, the Sibyl had remained silent. The Sibyl now sat on her bench, her basket by her side, as if she had been sitting there since the beginning of the world. Ulysses looked at her, and for the first time she looked back at him. He imagined what the old woman saw, an old man in dirty rags, possessing nothing, belonging nowhere. A question had been shaping itself since he'd left home in the early years of the war, and after his first death, and then after the second, and later towards the end of the fighting and the city's fall, and all throughout the cursed voyage back after every new marvel and every new terror. His tongue now mouthed it, mumbling. Then he spoke it again more clearly. On her bench, the Sibyl lifted her ancient head. Her breast heaved with an asthmatic wheeze. Strands of grey hair, which had escaped from under her kerchief, blew now against her face and stuck to her wet jaw. She lifted a hand to her mouth, but didn't touch her lips. She uttered a low, moaning sound between a grunt and a cackle, let out a whistling sigh, and then a shriek, so shrill that the people coming now up her street in an ever-increasing crowd failed to hear it. Thank you.